Normally what I do at the start of any audience, whether there's 30, 40, 50, 500, it doesn't make any difference. I normally ask a question, but because this is a little bit tighter, I'll just make an assumption. And I'll assume that everyone in here is somebody's daughter or somebody's son. Okay? If I'm wrong, give me a shout. Yeah? Because what happens, and what seems to have happened over a period of time, is we've forgotten all about that. When I was speaking to teachers, they were teachers, but they were human teachers, human social workers, human cops, human engineers, human bank managers, human football players. They're all human to start with. But when we're recruiting them, we don't have any human traits on there in the person spec. It doesn't say you should care. Even if you're getting a job in NHS, it doesn't say you should care, which is a bit of a worry. It doesn't say you should have a sense of humour. It doesn't say, it might say you should be honest. That's about the closest we get to a human trait. The rest of the time is all the other stuff. So they go to all these lovely conferences and all these meetings, and they get nice things on the wall, and it's all there, and we just forget we're human. So what I like to do when I'm speaking to you is bring your whole self into the room. I don't know what it is you do, but I'm speaking to humans. Change begins at an individual level. That's how we change the world, at an individual level. If it was just about making things better and there was a lever to pull, trust me, it would have been pulled. I spent years searching for the lever, or even somebody who knew where it was, but there wasn't one. So, I'll be speaking from the perspective of violence and perhaps how I came to that. I always frighten people when I say, what's yours? I'm anti-violence, that wasn't the scene. I'm actually anti-violence prevention, just to reassure everybody. And the first thing you should know about violence is we don't learn how to be violent, we learn how not to be violent. And we learn that in the early years. The most important 4 years of a child's life are up to age 3. Because in those first 3 years, we learn to communicate, to negotiate, to compromise, we learn to problem solve, we learn to get on with people. Human babies are completely helpless. Completely helpless. The only thing they can rely on is establishing a relationship with their mum or their caregiver. They smile. Sometimes you smile back, but they smile. They can start to control you when they can't even speak. They begin to think they're omnipotent. Do you know? They cry, somebody comes, picks them up, changes them, feeds them. This is the business stuff. I'll go, that's again. 4 years later, they do the same thing. That's what happens. But we forget all of that stuff. We're born connected. And most problems happen when we become disconnected. When a baby's born, mum gets a spike in oxytocin. Oxytocin's a hormone. It's the cuddle hormone, the hug hormone, the one that makes you feel good. You know the one you knock 3 past the old firm, that one? That makes you feel really good. Those of you can remember that. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to do any of this. I was born on Camp Street in 1952. That's the only reason I'm here today, is because that was the connection, because I don't do this anymore. Anyway, so when we started doing the violence thing, we tried to work out, we need to prevent it. At that time, Scotland was the murder capital of Europe. We had more murders than any other country in Europe per head of population. We had a rate of 5.3 murders per 100,000 of our population. England and Wales, it was 1 per 100,000 of our population. And don't think it was just to do with the Ouija's, because it wasn't. Half of the murders in Scotland occurred out with Strathclyde, and half of those were committed by a knife. We had 3.5 times the number of people killed by a knife than anywhere else in Europe. 3.5 times. But we never saw that. We were just busy investigating murders. That's what we did. And we were really good at it. 98% detection rate. It was really good. But we never thought about how we might prevent them. And then Willie Ray, who was the chief constable, said, go and do something about that. So I met Karen McCluskey, who was our principal analyst, brain the size of Belgium. You know that story, if you're the smartest person in the room, find another room. I used to always do that. Get clever folk working for you, sign the reports. So we started trying to think how we might prevent this, and that's how we get into the early years. In 1997, the World Health Organization said that violence was a public health issue. And violence is defined as everything from bullying through to suicide. Suicide is self-directed violence. And it's huge in Scotland. But I think you've already been thinking about that. It's a huge thing in Scotland. And it's only now we're beginning to be big enough and bold enough and human enough to actually think about it and reach out and listen and understand a bit better. So we started looking at that, and we found some research that had been done by a couple of guys in the States, Vincent Felitti and Robert Ander, and it was called Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what Felitti had found, he was working on obesity. He was a doctor working on obesity, and he couldn't understand how he was helping people lose weight, but some people very quickly put the weight back on again. And it wasn't a physical thing. He couldn't work out how they were doing this, so he started to try and figure it out. So he had a cohort of about 17,500 people. And he found that lots of them had these adverse childhood experiences. Now, adverse childhood experiences can be lots of things, but it happened in the early years. The loss of a parent, sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse. And the loss of a parent can be divorce, or it can be a death. A whole range of things. And community, there was also community experiences, negative experiences. Poverty, poor housing, discrimination. All of these things created stress. He called it toxic stress. And it had an impact throughout life. There's a book by, I think it's Bruce Perry, called The Body Keeps the Score. You don't know why you're responding to things, but you're responding to things because it's there. And the great thing about ACEs for us was, it wasn't about them, it was about everybody. So if we all think back, we have all perhaps had some ACEs in our life. I'm not asking you to tell me about them, but I've had 6. So they're not a predictor of outcome. Because you've had adverse childhood experiences doesn't mean to say you're going to have a negative outcome. All they do is predict risk. Predict risk. If you think of the care community, for instance, now the overwhelming majority of children in care, like 90-odd%, are not in care because of something they did. They're in care because of something that happened to them or to their family. They represent, care experienced people represent 3% of the general population. 3%. If you go to Berlin, care experienced people in Berlin, it's over 50%. If you look at suicides, care experienced people related in there, much higher. Homelessness, much higher. Addiction rates, much higher. So that adverse childhood experiences, that's where it has this sort of impact. So that was the first thing we looked at. So that got us into the early years and how we might think about, well, we need to be better. And it's not about parents. It's not about saying parents are bad. It's not about that. It's about parents being as good as they can be. And sometimes it's difficult. I mean, if you're a 29-year-old professional and your partner's a 28-year-old professional and you live in a nice house, you drive nice cars, you've got good jobs, you've got a big family, and you have kids, they're a bloody challenge. It's hard. Kids can be challenging. But if you're not a professional and you're not 29, you're 17, and you're on your own, and you don't have wide family support, and we give you a house in one of the most deprived areas in the community, and then we say, bring your kid up. It's really difficult. Nobody lifts up their baby the day they're born and says, I'm going to make your life a misery. Nobody does that. Nobody. But that's what happens. You go to schools, you go to a career fest, there's nothing that says, all the murderers form a queue over here, drug addicts form a queue over here, could we have the prostitutes in that corner? That doesn't happen. It happens through life and the way things happen to them. So that was the first thing we went into. The next thing we came across through Harry Burns, who's the Chief Medical Officer, and if you've ever got time, click into YouTube and look for Harry Burns and him speaking. So Harry, he's just outstanding. And again, huge brain. Always get somebody who's really good. And he was talking about a guy called, when we met Harry Burns at first, he was the Chief Medical Officer in Glasgow. And Can and I went to see him because we'd learned it was a public health issue. But he's a medical officer. So we chatted to his door, got an appointment, and sat down and, can I help you? He said, because he had this detective chief super that he'd never met before and he didn't know what it was about. And I said, yeah, really. What are you doing about violence? And he, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, it's a public health issue. You're the public health guy. What are you doing? And he wasn't doing anything. But at the same time, he had been a cardiovascular surgeon. And he was trying to work out how people took longer to recover from his operations if they lived in particular areas of Glasgow. In other areas, they recovered in 4 or 5 weeks. And others took 9-10 weeks. And he couldn't understand this. And that was back to when he started looking at adverse childhood experiences, community experiences, that was the issue. That was there. So he was talking about a guy called Aaron Antonovsky, fabulous name. But anyway, what Antonovsky did was, Antonovsky had a cohort of people who had been either born in the camps during the Holocaust or had been children in the camps during the Holocaust. And he followed them up into adulthood. And he found that the vast majority of them weren't having good lives. You can imagine, relationships were difficult for them, they were depressed, they were anxious, there was a whole range of problems they had. But there was a group who were absolutely fine, a small percentage. So good old Adam looked at them, because you know how we're always obsessed with what makes us ill as opposed to what makes us healthy? And we need to start thinking about what makes us healthy. He looked at this group and he called it, they all had something in common, and he called it a sense of coherence. And what it was, a sense of coherence is, number one, your world is explicable. Your world makes sense to you. You feel you've got some control over your world. You recognise the challenges that are there and you consider them worth taking on, and you've got the resilience to do that. If you don't have those things, it's there. So, if you start to think about that sense of coherence for yourselves, control of your world. You're late for a meeting. Usually, when you're going on holiday, airports are fabulous. I used to do lots of travelling, always on my own. It's always easier on your own, I have to tell you. You could actually touch the tension. It was great, you could touch it. Because here were families that had to be together for longer than 48 hours in about 8 or 9 months. And all of a sudden, they're all together at the airport. The kids are flying high as kites between the E numbers and excited about where they're going. Dad's thinking, holy shit, what's happening here? Mum's thinking, I hope the apartment's okay, I hope everything's booked, because she probably did the book, hope everything's okay. He said, I'm going to get tickets. You see everything booked in, that's the whole thing. Do you know the old joke, I wish I'd gone to piano, darling? Why? I left the tickets and told you, you know that one? And you can actually see that tension, because they've no control over what's happening. You're stuck in a traffic jam. You know, M6 closed. You're there for 5 hours. No control. Control's taken away from you. Yeah? You imagine a kid at school. You know, where we say to them, stick in, because you need to do well. Go to university. Some kids are trying to get through the day. When they go home at night, they don't know if they're going to be fed, they don't know if the house is going to be warm. Is mum going to be there? Is mum going to be drunk? Is dad going to be drunk? Is dad going to be angry? Are you going to have any food? And you want them to learn? You think they're going to plan for the future? Really? They have no control over it. So they're living in a constant state of stress. Toxic stress, it eats away at us all the time. When you see the headline in the Daily Mail saying, prison's so soft, men would rather be in jail than outside. Well, here's the script. When you're in jail, your world's explicable. Your world is explainable. You can have some control over what's happening to you. See, when you're outside, you're homeless. There's drugs, there's alcohol, there's violence, there's loneliness. All of that stuff. Where would you rather be? Well, I'd rather be. You used to always say they've got flat screen tellies. I remember somebody I think it was the Sun, was talking about it. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do with you. If you go out and buy me a brand new telly that isn't flat screen, I'll give you £1,000. Because the only telly you can get are bloody flat screen, you know. So there was an issue around that with Antonovsky. And if you think about, stress is a good thing. It's like cholesterol, there's good and bad. There's good stress. I mean, I'm stressed today because I haven't done this for a long time, but it's an okay stress. It's a stress that means when I go home, I'll just go and play golf, it'll be fine, and think about all you guys here at work. It's fun. You'll enjoy it when it comes. Stress is, you can, there are 4 levels, the easiest way to think about it. Chaos, just coping, thriving. Yeah? And I always use the example when I was working. I'd be at home when I was detective superintendent of the East, London Road at Glasgow. And that time, we had plenty of work, loads of workers. I would be at home, in bed, sleeping. 2:30 in the morning. Thriving. Cozy pie next to my wife. Cozy pie. Great. Then the phone would ring, because I was on call, and I left the phone. Oh, sorry boys, duty officer force control. We've got a murder at the East. Do you know that? So I'd always have a notepad there, and I'd take some notes. Who's the DI? It's in J, Detective Inspector, so and so on. Oh, jeez, he's on a piece. Right, okay. Alright, that's so fine. So I've moved from that thriving into just coping. Yeah? That's all I'm doing, it's just coping, getting by it. And then I'm driving into the office. As I'm driving in, everything's hunky-dory, I'm getting myself all sorted out, what I'm going to do, who's there, what's to happen, the usual stuff. You click in, it's a technical skill, you click into it. But if you get to London Road, there's gates at the back, they have to be pressed to open the gate. So they know I'm coming, they see the camera, they open it up, and I've got a parking bay, it's over the back. So I park in the parking bay, climb out of the car, and as I'm walking towards the back of the office, 3 or 4 people come out. Normally the DI, who's another, the duty superintendent, who covers the whole area, maybe a fiscal, maybe something, and they're walking towards me, and they're all just at the same time. And we're right into chaos. They don't want to tell me a story. We're into chaos. And I used to always do it. The best way to deal with that is disengage. Just. And eventually they stop talking. And you go, right. What you do is put the kettle on, get some custard creams, and come into my office and let's talk about what needs to be done. Okay? Because whoever's dead will still be dead once we've had a cup of tea. We've secured the scene, end the story. Because all the clever stuff's been done long before that turned up. That's all done. You go in and sit down, and then we can get through the planning. So we move right back into coping again, it's easy. Kids can't always do that. People in life can't always do that. And at school sometimes the only consistent adult in a child's life might be that teacher. The only safe space might be that school. So that's the place where we have to understand the impact it can have and how important it is to be there. So Antonovsky, now the ACEs as well, that was an English study. So there's a guy, Mark Bellis, who's a professor. He was at John Moore University. I think he's at Cardiff now. Public health guy that we did a bit of work with. And he did an ACEs review, bit of ACEs research in Wales for 18 to 69-year-olds. And what he found was that compared to those with no adverse childhood experiences, compared to those with 4 or more, you're 16 times, those with 4 or more, 16 times more likely to end up in the jail. 15 times more likely to become addicted to cocaine or heroin. I think it's something like 7 times more likely to be a problem drinker. 8 times more likely to be involved in violence in the preceding 12 months. They had a serious impact coming through it. And when I was thinking about this, it absolutely made sense to me. When I was a DS at Easterhouse and Granite House at Easterhouse, I used to work out, how is it that in this close, there are 6 houses, and kids about the same age, you all get brought up at the same time, and yet one ends up a teacher, one ends up joins the police, one ends up a murderer, she's a heroin addict, a prostitute. How did that happen? Because it's the same environment. So it's what happens behind that door. That's where it's hugely important. Those early years have a significant impact on it. And that human part of that, the chaos thing, is about, I just want to make sure I get that, the right response to that. Because if you think about stress, if you think about the one we talk about and we're probably knowledgeable about, or some idea about, is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we understand that service people coming back from theatres of war, conflict, would come back from that. You can understand how they may have that post-traumatic stress. It absolutely makes sense. You think if you're a kid and you live in a violent house with an aggressive father, you know, you bring a child up in a war zone, you create a warrior. Kids don't leave the house and say, I'm going to be violent today. That's the only solution they have to stuff. That's the only response they have. The only response they have is aggression and violence, because that's all that's been modeled for them. They don't know how to problem solve it. They don't know how to understand it. They don't know how to talk it through. That's how, no matter the question, relationships are the answer. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Relationships are hugely important. Think about call centres. Who likes the call centre? I hope you don't work, but I mean, anybody had a really pleasant experience with a call centre? Sometimes they're efficient. I mean, I always remember the police said, oh, well, you get caught out. That was loaded important, that was the Strathclyde Police. Anyway, it's seldom you have a pleasant experience. You get the chatbot, live chat. It's not live, it's an algorithm. Just type in complaint, you'll get somebody on there quite quickly after that, or go on Twitter, at them. Nobody, because it's a relationship thing. It's a relationship. It's like, I buy my cars from a guy who's my best, he was my best man 40 years ago. No, 48 years ago, sorry. And I was his. I know him. I like the product. I like the price. So it's not just about the product and the price, it's about the relationship. You know, you come out of a restaurant, you tip somebody if you're the good stuff. We don't do that when we're buying a car, you don't do that in other places, but you'll pick up on the relationship that you had. Was that person helpful? Was it a good place that day? Was it good to be? And that's how when Sally contacted me and asked, it was the 1952 connection, of course, but it was also the notion that I do think that this is far more than a football club. And that's hugely important. I'm a father of daughters. The RC is it Abdel Bayet, father of daughters. Anyway, I'm a father of daughters and a granddaughter. So it's hugely important. One of the biggest main causes of violence is inequality. Inequality is one of the biggest causes of violence. The least equal countries are the most violent countries. America. And don't think criminal justice will fix it. Criminal justice is a service of last resort. By the time it comes to criminal justice, it's too late. Our job is to stabilise the patient. That's it. All the problems that make it happen before you get there are there. Now, don't get me wrong, we'll never eradicate violence. I mean, that's why we're the violence reduction unit. We have a vision, not a hallucination, you know. We're never saying we're going to make violence a thing of the past, but we can reduce it. And violence against women is hugely important. If we don't fix violence against women, we will never fix violence. And the way we do that is to start speaking about real equality. If you think about the recent, I'm getting a bit vexed about the childcare that the government announced in that. That's not childcare, that's to get women back to work. That's not about childcare. And if we really valued women, if we really valued parenting, in Sweden they get 2 years paternity leave that they can share between mum and dad. So dad will do it, mum will do it for the first 6 months and then go back to their job, and dad will do it for the next 6 months. In Sweden they call the guys latte dads, because they all meet for coffee or they meet for football, or women would meet for a coffee or go somewhere else, they meet and go and play football with their kids. And because they recognise that's the important thing. In the longer term, that's the important thing. It's not next week or next month or next year, it's the next generation make a difference in. Because it falls into generations. This science is epigenetics, but if you weren't parented, if you had a difficult childhood, you'll find it difficult to be a parent as well. And I remember when we did, I'm an advisor on the STD appeal, and I remember we went to Who Cares Scotland, which is a charity that represents children in care experienced people, not just children. And one of the girls spoke to Ashley Cameron, and she said, I was taken away from my family and given a service when what I really needed was love. And it just, bang, that's it. No service. When I spoke to the care inspectorate about 3-4 months ago, they go along and inspect children's homes is one of the places to go, nurseries. And they check the water temperature's okay so the kids don't get burned, and they check if the fire extinguishers there, and they check the doors are there, and do they sign the kids in and sign it, do they do all this stuff, do the kids get clean like and I said, who do the kids go to if they need to speak to somebody about something personal and important? Because we did all the clinical stuff, but we forgot about the human stuff. Kids don't need a service. Kids need somebody they can trust. And we're all like that. We all need somebody. We all need to be connected. And the notion here, when I looked at the Welfare Society, and it says, our aim is to improve lives. That's it. You don't necessarily need to fix it, but you need to make it better. And improving it makes it better. Even if it's just one person, and even today, if the only person you make it better for is you, that's fine. Because self-care is important too. Can't be the wounded healer and keep doing it. But making it better for somebody, not doing it to them, but listening to what people need. And it's not always about money. It's not, I mean, look at some of the stuff that happens when they take primary school kids into nursing homes, care homes. It's huge. Because people are just lonely sometimes. And I do sense that, you know, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you're content, you're in the moment. That's that mindfulness notion. We need to get into the moment a bit more. And that's where sport for kids is fabulous, because that gets them in the moment. It gets them focused in there. They're not thinking about that later on. For that brief respite, they're getting it there. It's not always the same for us when we're watching football in the moment, I can tell you. It's not always mindful and content. So we have to think about that. And I get a sense right now in the country that we are all a bit anxious about things. They are thinking, where are we going? We're back to that. We get the notion our world's no longer explainable, certainly not controllable. Can we actually cope with it? And I'm not sure, some of us can, and it's absolutely fine. but it's really, really difficult. And some of the kids who went through COVID and were isolated, they didn't know why that happened to them. They didn't know it was because of something else. They were thinking, some of the kids, it was their fault. What's happening? I can't go in the place. I can't go out there. And they can't articulate it. They can't tell you. They just know that's how it makes them feel. So the idea of improving it is hugely important. And the idea of Motherwell Football Club, it has to be, it's more than football. Absolutely more than football. Not everybody in Motherwell supports football. Not every football supporter in Motherwell supports Motherwell. Don't know why that should be. But anyway, they don't. But that doesn't mean to say you're only looking after the people who support. You're talking about the community. And this is something that's consistent. This is something that's physical. It's a presence. It's here. This is what we can do. And it might just be about one person, because that changes on an individual level. It's not about saying, right, we're going to change the world, we need, and that's back to the non-human business model, you know. Let's get a plan, let's get some milestones, let's get some outcomes, let's get a project initiation document, let's get, really, done all that stuff. The great thing about strategies, I remember falling out with Glasgow City Council, which is really dead easy. They had said, we've got a new strategy, it's called One Glasgow. I said, that's forward thinking. When that one fails, you can have two Glasgow. But that's what we do. Strategies never fail. In India in here who's been in charge of strategy, they don't fail. They just move on to a new strategy. So it's not about that. Change begins at an individual level. So you need to start thinking about what you do as an individual for an individual issue. Whether it's somebody you meet, somebody you encounter in business, somebody you encounter at football, somebody you meet in a pub or in a restaurant, or you're out for a cup of tea, it doesn't matter. That chat, that idea, that thought, because you can become unaware of things. It's and you know that Arthur Ashe, start where you are and do what you can. That's it. Don't worry about we need to change the world. It'd be great if we could, but listen, don't stop looking for the lever. If you find that you're a bell, I mean, I'll come out of retirement, but it's not there. And it's not always about money. It's not always about money. Lots of the time the money just helps us facilitate things. It just helps us do it. It's about reconnecting to that stuff that, you know, it really is about getting together. I mean, football is a classic example of that. Where fans all come together, the common purpose is that they support that particular football team on that day. And there's a great sense of stuff around that. I mean, I play golf in a syndicate, we call it the petrol pumpers, I'm not telling you why that is, but anyway. And there's a great, I just like the crack. It's really, you know what it's like, it's really good when you get together. My wife still meets up with a group of grands that went to the toddlers with the grandkids. They still go for a coffee and go for a dinner and a few cocktails occasionally. You know, that's what we like. And everybody's the same. We think people are different. They're not. They're exactly the same. And that idea of world society being here and doing stuff connected to it is huge, huge potential. And when Karen and I set up the VRU, Willie Ray said, do you have a vision statement, you know? We actually got it eventually, the violence is preventable, not inevitable. But the first one we had is, we'll not make it worse. It lacks aspiration, but you know what I mean? But you need to start somewhere. And the truth of the matter is, trust me, you won't make it worse by saying to somebody, how are you doing? Because the other sort of thing that's happening right now that's beginning to change is we're becoming more trauma aware. When I was talking about this 15 years ago, people go, oh, I've not heard of that. Now lots and lots of people have heard of that. Trauma aware. When a kid's misbehaving, see the child know the behaviour. If you say, why are you doing that? Why don't you ask the question, what happened to you? Because if the kid's reacting in a particular way, why? There's something bothering them. You know, this idea that, Victorian idea that Rees Mogg has that we're just willful children should be fired up the chimney. Nonsense. It's not about that. They're trying to tell you something. They're trying to communicate the best way they can. When they're babies, they cry because their nappy's full or they're hungry. They need fed. When they get a bit older, they're feeling things, but they can't articulate. And then when they get issued with hormones, because doing the healthy there, because some of them shouldn't be getting hormones, but it goes from there. So the stuff that you're doing, no matter where you work, remember you're human first of all. And see if you introduce it into your business, Gibson's. Introduce it into your business, it's a good thing. There's more and more people now thinking about it. A very quick anecdote to finish. There's a young guy called James Doherty, who we got involved in the gangs project within the East End of Glasgow. James is a recovering addict, and he had served time in prison for a couple of homicides. He had a fight with his best pal, and he was chasing his best pal, who ran out into the road and was killed.
Killed the dog.
Huh?
Killed the dog.
Right, absolutely. Now, James is the wisest guy I've come across. James is in recovery all the time. He's huge. He just talks so much sense. And really active in changing the way things are, how we think about things. Theresa May came when she was Home Secretary, came to visit us at the Family Seduction Unit. And she was there with the head of the Home Office, I can't remember her name, a Dane. Anyway, I don't mean Dane, I'm as in a Dane, I can't be. Came to visit us, and we met with him in a conference room, Carnochan. And of course, Theresa May had a personal protection officer with her, because she's Home Secretary, so she had a cop with her who was armed with a Glock, and he was there. He was sitting outside. So we were telling her about James, and you should meet James. And what we'll do is we'll introduce you to James, and then we'll leave you to it. We'll let you go on and have a chat with James. So James went in and had a player, and Carl and I came out, and the cup of coffee with a player away, and kindred spirits, blah, blah, blah. He said, "Who's the boy?" I said, "That's James." He said, "No, does he work for you?" I said, "No, we can't employ him." I said, he's got a conviction for a couple of homicides in the route. What? And I said, "Oh, he's not, he's fine." He said, "Damn, it's okay." And you could see visibly, you know, he went from that private to just cold and almost into chaos, thinking you got to kick the door in. But of course, he was absolutely fine. But in fact, you just listen to people and listen to their story. We call it lived experience, which is a bit, I think, naff. But don't think that people who have got an MBA or a doctorate or whatever know everything they need to know. It's like we need to introduce that little bit into it. Like what really happens? What's it really like? Where does that matter? Where does that hit the ground? So I mean, I used to say to people, my job's not to give the answers, it's just to alarm you. I hope you can see that there is a connection to just human stuff. It's not just about more cops in the street. Fine. You know, 1,000 extra cops, you would better have 1,000 extra health visitors, is the truth of the matter. That would make far more sense. We need more libraries, we need more youth clubs, we need that. And we don't think, they're the first things to go because we don't think they're important. The inequality thing is huge. I mean, the reason why we need to go back to work is usually they get 2 or 3 jobs because they're always in the lowest paid. If I'm speaking to nursery school staff, 99% women, and they'll all be on minimum wage. And the guy who owns the nurseries, because they'll own 5 or 6, and it's usually he would drive in a Porsche or something like that, it's fine. But it's usually on minimum wage, and it's usually who have no value, and parents have no value. Because in Scotland, I still think we tolerate kids, we don't actually like them that much. We love our own, but other ones, and I think we need to get by that. We need to get by it. Inequality is huge. So, thanks for your time. I'm going to play golf later on. Did I say that? And nobody does again for me. So, thanks for your time.